what is going on YouTube? This is Acid Roots. So I'm going to review the soundtrack to Donnie Darko. Basically, this product is called Donnie Darko Music from the original motion picture score, and this product came out in the spring of 2002. Now, the thing about this particular soundtrack here is just the fact that it's not an actual soundtrack with artists on here apart from one particular song, which is called Mad World by the singer Gary Jules, as far as those pictures can happen with it. Apart from that, this is mostly instrumentals, but I still wanted to review this because I just remember the particular kind of haunting aspect of the Donnie Darko movie. Now, I do own that movie on Blu-ray, but I have not seen it as full bound as far as those pictures can happen. I probably watched about 35, maybe 45 minutes into the movie as far as those pictures can happen, so I don't know what happens with like the rabbit and some of the more, I don't know what happens with the particular haunting rabbit and some of that type fare as far as those pictures can happen, but I think that's a very amalgamated movie. Just the pitch behind it has a lot of clever aspects about it that just continue to have that ghastliness. Definitely needs to be movies like that again with that sort of impact, just the way that it delivered upon that way back in 2001. It's an excellent type fare, but this kind of crossed over into like the soundtrack type aspect. Now, I will say it's a mildly kind of disappointment. It's a mildly kind of disappointing aspect that there are not like actual more songs in here apart from Mad World. But I think the thing about Mad World is just the fact that it did have some late bloomer kind of popularity that was pretty awesome to kind of get. The soundtrack came out in the spring of 2002, but the single Mad World was released as a single in the fall of 2003. Just because Donnie Darko really caught on with like extra sales as far as this pitch kind of happened. Just had the aspect of just really catching fire. It was kind of like it was a particular kind of sleeping giant kind of movie that just was pretty impactful throughout a good chunk of like the 2000s as far as those fairs kind of happen. It was just a good look to kind of own that movie and some of those type fairs as far as those pitches kind of happen. But I look after it. So yeah, the movie and just the appeal behind this particular song, some of that type fair bolstered like the soundtrack further and gave it some relative further type popularity as far as those pitches kind of happen. But I look after it. I'm kind of losing track of the point I was trying to make here. But just to be able to say, I look within the tone. It would have been some excellent type fair to have gotten more songs like Mad World. I think this is definitely one of the album's best moments, but then this is just an overall good look for movie soundtracks as well. As I say, just the hauntedness. This is not typically kind of depicted too commonly. Like when you think of other type ones, I mean, you may get like ones like Freddy vs. Jason, that's just like a typical kind of horror kind of slasher type film or something like that, or Transformers, which is more of just like a kind of action futuristic type flick. Some of those type ones I review, but in terms of like gothic ambience, this is definitely like a hot topic and gothic kind of highlight here. This, you don't get too terribly much more gothic than this particular movie. Definite emo classic, I'd have to say. Just the appeal behind it, just the overall aspect. This is a real aspected type one to be able to get within the tone behind it. This works great for autumn time, and a lot of this music is pretty Dracula oriented. I just would have to say this fits like a glove in terms of that aspect of being able to say as to how many type hits that this particular project has. Now, it's subjective, the amount of hits that are on here. It maybe has a few more songs than probably like it does have a handful of songs that I don't recommend on here, but in terms of like the impact of what the soundtrack was aiming for with like the moroseness and the overall autumn bound type brush of the way that the overall autumn bound type brush of the way that this movie was depicting, it nails it pretty particularly well, I'd have to say. So I mean, this album score is going to get a middle of the road type score, but I definitely think that it should not be underappreciated just within the concept as far as saying this is good for like a movie score or not. I don't typically kind of review movie scores, but this one just had a lot more of like a biting type aspect. This particular soundtrack had a lot more biting of an aspect towards it, where I feel like it's just a good concept to kind of get some of this type of moroseness and the tone behind it. So it nails it. Not every single production on here really fits the fold. There's some kind of ones, so we'll get to that as far as me reviewing the rest of this product, but I'm definitely going to talk about Mad World and some of these other type ones just within the pitch. I mean, for the most part, it has more services about it than it doesn't, but it's just within the tone that not every single type one on here. It kind of makes it more of like a more half, maybe not half-baked, but more haphazard type score as far as the aspect of what it particularly did. But it's definitely still a good look. Some of this just works great for like good background type music for September, October, November, some of those type periods. This works great in the autumn. Maybe not as much spring or summer, some of those type pitches, but definitely for autumn and winter, I would have to say there's some good type fare just to have when it's cooler and crisper out as far as those pitches can happen. Just good type aspects, and it's just a real popular. I do feel like this is an alternative song classic in the song Mad World within those pitches. It's really nailed this particular one. It's a real standout. And apparently, I looked this product up on Spotify. I think that this actual song, this is a pretty contemporary type one on here as far as this pitch can happen. I want to say that the Mad World, just to check Yeah, the Donnie Darko soundtrack or the score, the particular song Mad World, which was a single from this project, has over 280 million plays on Spotify. So it's definitely one that's pretty commonplace within the tones. I do feel like this is a hot topic, emo and gothic classic just within those pitches. But yeah, so I'll go ahead and talk about some of these just to get towards it. Basically, just to say here, Mad World was the single, like I was saying. So it's like a grandiose kind of vintage haunting 2000s goth ballad to kind of get here. I'd have to say just a factory emo anthem, I feel like, within the pitch behind it, and a really good alternative highlight. So just the brooding kind of piano type production on here just feels great. Just feels ripped out of 2002, 2003, some of those type fares. Just a real nice stock highlight for some of that type fare. Kind of goes with the same casting crowd of folks that were watching like Fight Club every single day, or like ones like that. I'm trying to think of some other ones in there, like Resident Evil from 2002, some of those particular type pitches, just the particular type fare, some of that type aspects, just about it, just those early 2000s kind of gothic type ones kind of get within that pitch. So it's just some excellent type fare just in the pitch behind it, I'd had to say. But yeah, I look after, so just to describe this particular album, so there are 18 songs on this particular track list here, and the thing about it is just the fact as far as saying that the particular edition that I got from the particular edition that I received does not have the two extra songs on here, Head Over Heels by Tears for Fears and The Killing Moon by Echo and the Bunny Men. So this particular one goes to 18 songs, which ends with the Mad World alternative. The particular version I have ends with the Mad World alternate mix as far as this pitch can happen. So out of those 18 songs, I wound up recommending 8. So it's kind of the pitch where I was saying it's kind of middle of the road, kind of almost scattershot, kind of haphazard. But it's just the impact, the ideas that were off this product, and the originality factor is extremely high. It's this kind of concept that despite the fact that it's not going to get an overwhelmingly winning type score, I still have to give it a lot of credit just in the pitch, because there's just not a lot of movies like this. The impact and just the things that this movie did, this is a great impactful type movie. Just had the aspect of being well put together, and just the concept and the ideas and the amalgamation behind it just does not negate the score within the project of what's particularly happened. So I'm going to give the score of this project me recommending 8 out of 18 on here, like a 5.75, and you would think it almost should get like a 4.75 because it's actually half the songs on here. But it's just the concept that this particular aspect, in terms of like a score, just the way that it nails these particular ones. This is some really moody and brooding type aspect. This is some really moody and brooding type ambience kind of get here that just feels, you really do feel like you're Dracula or some sort of gothic personality, someone that would be some sort of character out of like a vampire movie or something like Twilight, some of those type pitches just within the tone behind it. Just really has like some wicked kind of kick-ass type appeal, I'd have to say. But we'll go ahead and talk about the 8 songs I recommend on here. So the 8 songs I recommend would be Mad World, Manipulated Living, Liquid Spear Waltz, Cellar Door, Did You Know Him, Carpathian Ridge, Rosie Darko, and The Artifact in Living. So talk about a lot of these on here. So the unfortunate aspect is this, the Mad World alternate mix I didn't really recommend as far as those picks can happen. Just did not really contribute to much. It would have been interesting to have gotten like a different production on there or something like that, but it just basically added like a kind of boom bap kind of drum pattern on there that just didn't really help that much. I feel like the original Mad World, just the haunting moroseness just fit that much better. It didn't really entertain like too much of a concept to have that bonus kind of addition on here. So it's this kind of concept. It would have been nice to have gotten like a follow-up song just to see what that Gary Jules type dude would have been able to do with something else. Just wondering if he could have had like some other type idea that could have really bolstered this product. But for what it is, like I've said, Mad World is a gothic classic, just in the pitch, hot topic classic. But just to talk about some of these on here, so basically all these ones I recommend are just the real morose kind. A lot of these are just some morose piano type patterns that just work extremely well, I'd have to say. Like one, for example, would be Did You Know Him? It's like a dark revisit kind of music to kind of get here, just an encompassing kind of ghastliness about this particular song. Very Dracula-like, crisp conduct to kind of get within that aspect, and this is the very elegant type song. So there's just some ones on here, like I feel like Liquid Spear Waltz, Rosie Darko, some of these type ones just have the aspect of just having that particular type of appeal. But this is a particular one that just kind of feels like some brief kind of Did You Know Him kind of feels like some brief kind of just revisit, and by that I just mean the aspect of just like some catching up, some standard fare like that. Just, I mean, the aspect with this entertaining, the concept of being a score to a movie that has a plot, and just the theatrics of being suited to it, is just kind of the concept of saying, oh hey, it's been a while, you know, some of that type tone, just like that brooding typeness that kind of goes along with that. I feel like Rosie Darko is another good one for that particular type sense. It's like a mild kind of gothic, contemporary kind of mess hall type music to kind of get here. Now the thing about it is it's not going to have like verses and patterns where you're going to have like verse 1, verse 2, like a typical song where it's just going to be the same type pattern, and it kind of goes through motion. So just describing like the whole song is a little bit different than describing like the way a particular song format would kind of go. Like the beginning of the song is not going to be the same as like the end of the song as far as those pitches kind of happen, but it just basically has like a good kind of Dracula-like brooding just about it, just a mess hall type music kind of get here, just brief catching up I'd have to say, and a late shift kind of gel and smoke one up as far as those pitches kind of happen, just some good type fare, just would have to say. Did you know him and Rosie Darko are just both ones that kind of have like the aspect of just like brief kind of contemporariness just within the tone of just being in like the typical kind of brooding type fashion, just something that just feels a little bit more kind of shielded and just within the aspect of just kind of like it's kind of bruised just within the aspect as far as those pitches can happen. So some good type fare for that, but just works great. I mean, just great winter autumn type music just in the fare behind it. It's excellent aspects of this piano fit. The piano fare on here is pretty excellent. Carpathian Ridge is a nice one as well. It's like a looming and kind of cagey beginning that this particular song kind of has. Pretty similar to like Manipulated Living, I'd have to say. Some good type aspects that kind of have some different type tones. That just something that would kind of be maybe not so much like a rave, but just like a place where there kind of be like some cellar doors or just some sort of pitch where it just kind of feels a little bit more ghastly with like an aspect of just like a larger kind of mansion type fare. Just some good. It kind of feels like rich neighborhood type fare just with an aspect of also kind of old fashioned, like a creepy type sense, I'd have to say. Just some kind of morose reflection and just a gas kind of afterthought that I had to say about this, and it's like some good kind of autumn snaz kind of get here. So there's also some ones just for like that rumination, I'd have to say, just a real good concept of this, like the pitch behind it. There's some songs on here like Liquid Spear Waltz and The Artifact and Living that just kind of have some of these aspects as far as just like when the more haunting kind of Dracula type fare just and the more haunting kind of Dracula type fare kind of shows up. It's just the aspect of just kind of having a good fusion of some of these type ones just to be able to get. I'd say particularly the Carpathian Ridge is just one that kind of feels like just an after moments kind of makeshift kind of, like I'd particularly say Carpathian Ridge is just one that feels like some good after moments kind of makeshift relief in like the autumn time as far as those pitches kind of happen. Just the brief concept of just checking the mail, some of that type fare, checking your cell phone, some of those type pitches, just figuring out what's going to happen across the next few hours in just like a more kind of brooding type sense as far as those pitches kind of go. And that leads to some songs like Liquid Spear Waltz and The Artifact and Living. Basically, Liquid Spear Waltz is like a syrupy, very Dracula-like night ambience to kind of get here. Just a moody kind of piano gloom to definitely have, and it's like some great autumn time fits to kind of have within that pitch behind us. So it's just the aspect, it's that typical kind of moroseness. Just really feels great to kind of sink into that as far as some of those pitches kind of happen. If you do really appreciate that time of year, spooky season, some of that typeness, even when that starts up in some cases like late August, as far as the leaves starting to change colors and fall off the trees, as far as those pitches can happen, it's good type fair to kind of have some of that aspect. But I mean, the thing about it is it kind of deals with the conduct of the movie. It's not just like typical kind of just putting up Halloween decorations as much as it is kind of like the broodiness. It is kind of saying it just kind of has more of like a chip on its shoulder. It's that typical kind of emo type fashion. If you do have like the aspect of just like kind of having like some haphazard, just kind of having like some pensiveness, or just the aspect of just kind of being in a more just kind of having some pensiveness or kind of being in a more contemplative type mode as far as those pitches can happen. Just really fits the ambience. These particular songs really nail the aspect of some pensive kind of contemplation as far as those fairs can happen. Just the same standard type fair, just really kind of fitting like the autumn fatigue as far as those pitches can happen. Whether it's just makeshift kind of toils or just the aspect of just really not being in the mood, kind of having a bad hair day, something like that. It's just within the pitch of just having that particular kind of glared kind of autumn dredge just within the pitch behind. Some nice ones. That's Liquid Spear Waltz. That's The Artifact of Living. That's Carpathian Ridge, some of these type ones I'd have to say. But a nice one on here that Madonna sampled for her tour back in the day in like the late 2000s. It's Manipulated Living. It's like a murky kind of tunnely night shift essence to kind of get here. Just a good late snack runs to kind of have in Cretinous kind of party time. This is the closest one to like a turn up type song and like a relative type pitch of something that's going to be something feisty within the aspect, really having like some downtime as far as like some craziness factor just in the pitch behind it, a little bit more in like a turn up type aspect, something for a little bit more contemporary typeness. I mean, there's definitely some contemporary on here, but it's just in a more elegant type composition. But Manipulated Living, and then I'd also say that there's another one like a little bit at the beginning of Carpathian Ridge that just had the aspect of like some good type tones for like something that kind of has the aspect just a little bit more just bustle about it in terms of like something festive, but it keeps like the haunting type appeal. So it's just kind of something that's like a gothic version of like something 3-6 Mafia would kind of do. Just the aspect of just a more gothic type version of something 3-6 Mafia would kind of do. Just the conduct of just kind of a dramatic type fashion, but just the essence of just late shift kind of outdoor, just contemporary walk arounds and stroll arounds as far as those pitch can happen. Just an aspect behind just out in the midst like the night wind. Definitely I'd say just Cretinous type appeal. Cellar Door is a nice one as well. It's like a grand contemplation, like a typical kind of morose commerce. I'd have to say about this one, just a brushy and crisp kind of stroll around type feel. I'd have to say about this one, it's pretty glary type song kind of get. So Cellar Door is just kind of like some extra time I would feel like here, just in certain sense. So Cellar Door is just some extra time to kind of have within that particular fashion. Just a simple kind of one, just a great idea for some contemplation, some of that type fare, just within the snappiness of the particular song. I'd have to say, just a real aspect of just kind of having some extra thoughts, just kind of like, oh, just kind of realizing just amongst the aspect. I mean, it's not as full bound as if taking like the conduct of the movie that full blown seriously, but it's just within the pitch and just having like some good rumination type music that should just instill like some good vibes and like a typical kind of emo, moody, and brooding type sense just within the pitch behind it. This works for that particular fare, but this feels brushy just in the aspect typical October, September type fare just in the pitch behind it. Do you like some of these morose type ones? Just a little bit more. This one's not quite as much like catching up or just within the tone of like that rumination, but just kind of after makeshift kind of rumination. This just kind of feels like some extra time. I would say Cellar Door is just another typical kind of extra time type song kind of get within that standard contemplation. Just some more, just a more typical kind of autumn makeshift just within the sense behind it. Just that regular routine type fashion just with the aspect behind it. Typical haunting type fare, I'd say some good type tones for that. Just really feels workaday in like a traditional kind of setting of like standard vanilla kind of gothic emo-ness just in the pitch. So it's a good type tone for that. And then the Artifact and Living is a nice one on here. This is probably one of the best songs on here. This is one of the lengthier songs as far as those pitches kind of happen, but it definitely nails it within the pitch. It's like a nice brooding groove about this particular one. One of the album's best and most haunting I'd have to say about this one. It's like a nice gothic songs like a nice gothic hallway and pitches like that to kind of have within the aspect behind it. It really has the particular fare. I mean, a lot of these particular songs sound pretty similar. Most of these just have that typical kind of real haunting, just kind of sobering piano keys on them as far as those pitches can happen. They all have that particular kind of sparkling just aspect, something you expect from Evanescence or like Avril Lavigne, people like that, folks like that, as far as those pitches can have them. It's just within the tone, that the hauntiness about this particular movie. That's what makes it stand out. It's just the fact that the particular, they have different patterns to some of these type songs, but they're not boring in the sense of them sounding too similar as far as those pitches can have. So a lot of these, some of these have some grooves about them. They just kind of have like that mild kind of jive. I mean, it keeps the creepiness factor about them. It's not like these are going to be dance type songs where the disco balls and like the flashing lights are going to break out, but it's just with an aspect to have like a mild type groove about them as far as some catching up and just some standard kind of mild contemplation with this with an aspect behind it. So some good type fares for that. It is mildly contemporary, but for the most part it kind of keeps like that kind of brooding, more Fight Club-esque type aspect about them that just has the tone of just kind of having like a chip on your shoulder just with the tone behind it. But I just like the character of it. This really feels like one of those type tones as far as those pitches kind of happen. So just, it keeps the theme of the movie and it nails the particular vibe, just the hauntiness, the autumn gauze and conduct and this overall traverse and this contemporariness just works extremely well, it has to say. So yeah, this album gets a 5.75 out of 10. Just to talk about some of the songs I don't recommend on here, there's just some ones that don't work as well. There's like a series of these, like Burn It to the Ground, Slipping Away, and Gretchen Ross, that kind of add like some breathy kind of vocals to like how these aspects kind of happen. Kind of like something you would hear as like a treasure's getting ready to show up and they're like, ah, or something like that, just in the pitch. It just doesn't necessarily add like the aspect of being able to do it within the tone behind it, so it just doesn't really have the conduct. I mean, I feel like the piano on the instrumental on this particular song has more to do than like the vocalists that are on these particular songs. I just feel like some of the aspects, sometimes they are nailed better, but the aspect they just kind of detracted from in like those relative type senses. I found myself wanting to listen to more of like the instrumentation more so than the actual effects of what was trying to be added to the song, because this is like a score to the movie, and it's just kind of the concept that these are moments where it just contributes to actually enhancing the movie and like the dramatization, the after effects of that. So it just kind of has the tone that not all of these work. There's some ones in here like some of these time travel type ones, like Time Travel and Waltz in the Fourth Dimension and the Tangent Universe, and some of these type ones, the philosophy of time travel. They're just some poor type ones just in the tongues. I mean, I like the gothicness about this particular product, but with the science fiction side of things, it's not quite as catchy as far as those tones kind of happen with it. This aspect of some of that type fare, just like space and travel and some of that type stuff, this was not quite as aspected and deliver as well. Like I said, I didn't really appreciate the Mad World alternate mix as far as those pitches can happen. Didn't really contribute to much, and there's just some other ones on here like Insurance Trap and some other type ones like that that just didn't really Middlesex Times that just didn't really nail it to like the particular vibe that just had the aspect behind it. Middlesex Times was just kind of an in-between type one. Just kind of felt like a saunter around the house, but that one just didn't really nail the particular vibe. I was kind of expecting a little bit better of like a production type fare, something that could have had a little bit more creak of like a gothic typeness towards it, but just didn't really nail the tone. And just some of these type ones just didn't. Like, I feel like it really boils down to just having like a catching kind of instrumental. I definitely feel like they nailed that for the most part with these piano type ones, but just other aspects just didn't have like the full blown pizzazz of just being able to have like that particular appeal. It's trying to do some extra type stuff, but just the fittingness, it just did not have like the synchronization as full bound as what needed to particularly kind of happen. I mean, it was more trying to fit the movie aspects more so than be like a compelling kind of musical type soundtrack just in the pitch behind it. So you just have to question where you would listen to some of these type ones, like some of these type ones that don't have as much full bound appeal. You'd have to say when some of these have these vocals on here that just feels like you're watching the movie or something. It doesn't feel like something that you would listen to play while you go and take a piss real quick or something like that, or something that you would play while like you're sparking up something, like you're going to the kitchen to get a drink or something like that. Some of those type fares, or just some of that type fare where you're stepping away, where folks are going to listen to the music and not focus on you. Just in those pitches, just didn't have as much full bound type accuracy within it. But just within the tone, to be honest, so the social score, I'll probably give the social score like a 6.75 out of 10, because I feel like the aspect behind this is pretty strengthening. I definitely feel like the appeal of the song Mad World works extremely well just within the fare behind it. Real classic standout type song. 2000s kind of highlight, some gothic typeness, hot topic highlight, and an emo highlight overall. A gothic highlight, an alternative highlight, and an emo highlight overall, I'd say, just within the pitch behind this. Works within that aspect as far as those pairs can have it, but it gets a 6.75 just because there's so many snagging type songs. It's worth the purchase, especially nowadays that it's over 20 years as far as those pairs can have them, but this is not as much like a full-bound classic type project. Definitely has some good looks about it, but some of these more type moments may just be questionable. It's just maybe feeling some folks might think that you're maybe overly into this movie as a pair. Some folks may think that you're just overly kind of into this movie as opposed to like the casual type highlights that just stretch for days as far as those pitches can happen. It definitely has more than a few extra highlights on here as far as those pitches can happen, but it's not as much like a full-bound home run as what one might expect from like the impact of the movie. Movie's probably better than the soundtrack, but it's just with an aspect. This is a good bonus product to kind of pick up. Has some extra treats in here just within those aspects, but it's just kind of the fare that you just have to understand that it's patchier than probably what some folks may want to think as far as those pitches can happen. It's just within the tone. So 6.75 social. In terms of the future, like the unfortunate thing is Donnie Darko only had this movie. It might have had like some spin-off movies just within the fare, not really as full bound. Sure, maybe they were direct to video, but it's just within the pitch. So I think in terms of like a soundtrack or something like that, this is kind of a one and done just within those pitches. But I look after it, it's definitely very impactful. Like I said, this is a real good look to kind of get very credible type movie just in the aspect. Did some great things, had a standout single just in those pitches. In some cases, this soundtrack is worth it just for that single, but it's just kind of within the fare. It does have some extra bonus type stuff on here and like some gothic highlights that really nail it, but it's just kind of aspect that you just have to understand that it just is somewhat haphazard within the full bound delivery of it.